There is a world where the sick are photographed from inside. A woman falls on the ice, and somewhere a machine looks through her wrist and makes a picture of the bone and its crack. And for a while the picture matters more than the wrist, because the picture is the only version of the wrist a healer can question. In that world the pictures move, and they travel by water, from the house of healing that took them to the house of healing that can read them. And the moving is a trade, and the trade has a harbor, and the harbor has a guild. This is a report about the guild. I'll hold the stakes where you can see them, because the guild never did. And behind the harbor, hundreds of houses of the sick. And behind the houses, the sick themselves, in their millions. Every crate on every boat, somebody's worst morning. A picture delayed is a question a healer cannot ask. A picture lost is a crack nobody sets. The guild did not think about this much, and we do not enter that to be cruel. Nobody who moves freight thinks about freight. That is what makes it freight. We enter it because of how this report ends, and we want the ending visible from here. The way you can see a lighthouse long before you can see the rocks. The son of that world came to the guild in spring, and they gave him the title architect on his first day, and they gave him his size by his second, the way a harbor assigns a draft to a boat it has not yet seen in the water. A boy, they decided, something in oil and hinges, the kind of hand you send up a ladder with a rag. Oh, nobody consulted the water. The title and the size were never introduced to each other, and both were his, and only one of them was ever used. He asked, in his first month, how a lamp gets hung. A lamp is an afternoon of work. Bracket, wick, glass, done. Light where there was none. In the guild it was a season. The request went hand to hand along 11 desks, and every desk was owed its 2 days, and no man could say what most of the desks were for. Only that a lamp that skipped one arrived unblessed. A 4-hour job in a 4-week queue. The queue was called the process, and the process was called safety. And in 11 months the sun never once found the thing it had kept safe. But what it kept was full. 11 desks is 11 salaries, and a lamp that hangs itself in an afternoon feeds nobody. And nobody in the guild had ever said this out loud, because the first rule of a queue like that is that everybody is standing in it and nobody asks what it is for. The boys were trained on a boat that was said to be like the ship. It was like the ship the way a cousin is like a cousin. But when a thing worked on the practice boat, men said it works. And when it then failed at sea, they said it worked in practice. And both sentences were true, because works in practice and works at sea are statements about two different boats that happen to share a name. In the world under this one, there is a report with a sentence in it that says, environmental parity is structurally impossible, and that is the whole sentence. Translated, the rehearsal and the voyage were different boats, from the keel up, and no discipline on any deck could ever have made them one boat, because the difference was not a gap somebody forgot to close. It was the blueprint. That the guild had built a school for sailing a ship that did not exist, and it graduated men into open water that had never heard of the school. And when the sea disagreed with the diploma, the guild ruled, every time, in favor of the diploma. In the guild hall there was a board of lamps, one small lamp for every light in the harbor, and the board glowed green, wall to wall, year-round, and men warmed themselves at it, and visitors were shown it first. And at some point, years before the sun arrived, someone had painted the glass. But we will let that sentence do its own work. The lights of the harbor went unwatched for years, not a season, years, while the board that answered for them shone the color of good news. And the board was, in the only sense anyone measured, working. And there is an instrument like that in every world, In one it hangs in a guild hall. In another it sits in a living room and plays the same shows over and over. And it is green in its own way. And it also answers for lights nobody is watching. We said we wouldn't do this in every chapter. But consider it not done. The Cockers kept a ledger, and the ledger said every hole was sealed each season, and the cock had not left its barrels in over a year. Both facts lived in the same building, 10 steps apart, and in 11 months the son never saw the 10 steps walked by anyone but himself. But that is the whole entry. Some findings do not need rigging. Each morning the guild stood in a circle and described yesterday. A work that amounted to one plank a fortnight was told in armor, at length, with terrain. Effort was inflated the way a sail is, to move something, and praise went around the circle the way a toast goes around a table. Glasses up, obligatory, every man's turn coming, and not a drop of wine in any of the glasses. Constant, effusive, and unattached to any object in the room. And then the circle broke, and the same men, in twos, by the water barrel, complained about the rope guild, the sail guild, the watch, the hill, every hand in town that was not present. And they flattered inward and resented outward, and the two currents never crossed, and no man was lying in either direction. And that is the part worth an apprentice's attention. Both performances were sincere. A man can raise a toast and a knife in the same week and eat them both. A raising is the one gesture the two have in common, and it was the gesture that Hall had truly mastered. Any question that reached the bottom of things was answered with one sentence. It is the way it is done. Not our way, the way. The sentence wore the whole trade as a robe, and it was never followed by a reason, because it was not a claim. It was a door closing. The son learned to hear the way you hear a bolt. And when two men disagreed, the disagreement was carried to a meeting, and the meeting resolved it by resolving nothing until the oldest opinion in the room had outwitted the clock. A proposal was never refused. Refusal takes a spine and leaves a record. A proposal was simply never said yes to, and the absence of conflict was entered in the ledger as agreement, and the absence of agreement was entered as process. And by these two entries the future of the harbor was decided for 30 years by whichever sentences could sit still the longest. Over the guild board there is a lintel, and the lintel is the oldest witness this report has, so let it testify before the men do. 4 generations back, the founders cut a word into that stone. Shipwrights. A whole word, and an earned one. Those men built ships. The boats this entire report floats on were their boats, keel to lantern. And when they cut their name, they cut it deep, the way you cut a thing you expect to be checked against. That is what a sign was for in their age. It was a claim the door made so that the work inside could be measured against it. A stone arose. This book has already told you which way water leans. The first letter to go was the S, a shallow letter, cut last, cut least, and nobody recut it, and filed that before anything else, because it is the first finding. A guild of makers that will not maintain its own name has finished confessing, in the only language that stone speaks, which is subtraction. For the better part of 8 generations the door said Hipwrights, and the guild grew into it, because in every age the guild took its instructions from its own signage. By then they had stopped building ships, but they had carried the healer's freight so long they had come to mistake proximity for training, and they began, quietly, to take custom in joints. Bad hips, C's knees, the grandmother whose socket clicked on the stairs, and no schooling, no oath, no credentials but the door. Carpenters of the living, working a human joint the way you work a puppet's, carve the cup, peg the ball, and where a thing will not hold, string it, and call the string a tendon. If the people they mended moved ever after the way puppets move, a little late, a little pull. In every joint they set called, within the year, for 2 more settings, to repair the repair, and the guild charged the same for the second as for the first, and entered the returning line in the ledger as demand. It was the one trade in town that manufactured its own patience, and it grew. Of course it grew. A trade that cures people shrinks, and nobody in the hall ever asked why the waiting line only lengthened, because from behind a desk a lengthening line is indistinguishable from success. In time the H went the way of the S, and the door said Wrights, and the guild said it had always said that. Watch what the stone did there, because the stone was the one instrument on the property that never lied. The board in the hall could be painted. A lintel refuses the brush. All it can do is drop letters, and dropping them, it kept the guild's true ledger by subtraction. A word that told you what they made, and then a word that told you what they broke, and then a word that told you nothing at all except that they ranked. Shipwrights, hipwrights, rights, a trade, then a crime, then a title, sanded down in public, over the front door, at the speed of the seasons, while inside the hall the same subtraction ran in the men. And nobody reads a lintel on the way to a meeting. And the cruelty of erosion is that it leaves the best part standing. A right, the stump the stone left them, is still the best word in that language. A right is a maker, the wheel kind, the ship kind, the play kind. The word does not care what is made, only that making is the trade. And at the high table sat a man who could not spell the other word, the small one, the one that means correct. In letters, a dozen times in the sun's own hearing after a dozen corrections in front of witnesses. Whenever that man needed to write I am right, he wrote I am right. Understand the mistake. But once is a slip, twice is a habit. Every time, for years, against correction, is a doctrine. He had ruled that the word was his and the spelling books were the mistake, and he held the position the way the guild held every position, with a comfortable chair and no citations. But we have carried that man 6 letters for years now, one for each chair at the high table, and the number is not ours. We only found it, and in all that time they have never once made us laugh, because they are the whole guild in one stroke of the pen. Here was a man who, every single time he reached for item correct, took hold of the one word in his language that means a builder, the word over his own door, the trade he was sworn to and did not practice, and wore it wrong, and defended the wearing. He was not right, and he was not a right, and the pitiable thing, the thing that keeps this entry from being cruel, is that some part of his hand knew exactly which word it kept reaching for. From outside, a year like that reads as a list. But it was not lived as a list. It was lived as a sensation. And a sensation has to be entered here, because it is the part the 6 never felt, and the not feeling is the whole difference between the sun and the hall. And that world ran on rails. This report has been saying so in every paragraph. Run the year again, and everything lands where it landed. But determinism is not experienced as rails. It is experienced as forks. A dozen times a day the water offers 2 branches, and the sun had noticed early, the way you notice a stove, the law the branches obey. The true branch and the easy branch are almost never the same branch. Almost never. Just often enough that ease itself became a smell. the specific smell the rawness gave off. And now read the list you just read the way he lifted. 11 desks or one afternoon. A fork. The practice boat or the sea. A fork. A paint or glass, the circle or the barrel. Recut the lintel or let it go. Forks. Daily. Hourly. And at every single one the guild went easy. With a regularity, you could set a clock by, which, in a deterministic world, you can. And a man who takes the true branch every time does not grow noble by it. He grows numb. The hard choice, made constantly, stops feeling like virtue and starts feeling like a curse. And the only ones who stay comfortable are the ones hopping from easy to easy. The way you cross a creek on stones, and their feet stay dry, and they are raising a toast somewhere at this very moment, and the glass is still empty. And underneath it all, whole year, there was the hum. A wrongness with no single address. Not this desk, not that ledger, but the water table under the whole harbor. And his body reported it the way a keel reports shoal water. Constantly, at a pitch just under speech, in an organ that appears on no chart. He could give you its coordinates. He has them exact. Behind the left eye, from the back of the skull and pressing forward, like a lamp behind him throwing the next room onto the day before he entered it. The make of coordinates what you make of coordinates. This book keeps its theories out on their edge. The heart you can stand on needs no theory. A body is an instrument. And that harbor, you now know, kept two kinds. The kind that can be painted, and the kind that cannot. The board was the first kind. The lintel was the second. So is a body. We will not pretend the second kind of instrument is free to carry. Push its bearer out toward the edges. The long nights at sea. The bad bread eaten standing up. The bottle, which is not one easy branch, but the easy branch of every fork at once. Sold by the case. And the readings arrive faster than a man can file them. And reality itself can begin to give it the seams, the way a hull does in heavy seas. Not sinking, working. And somewhere past that there is a night that exists for every witness who ever carried a true instrument through a false hull. The night the experiment gives up on justice, files the whole case under lost, pours the second kind of instrument into the first kind of glass, and stops reporting. And that is the end of that story at every time it happens. And it is not a loud end. If the report simply stops, then the world never hears from that witness again, and never learns what it lost, which is the entire design working. But the sun has stood within sight of that night. He will not pretend the margin was wide. But his instrument never once agreed to read wrong for his comfort, and he never once painted it. And that is the difference this chapter has been circling. Not a gift. Not speed. Instrumentation. And the refusal to use it. And at night, the sun built. There was a coast south of the breakwater that the charts marked foul, and the guild therefore never visited. Charts being another board it did not check. He went there after hours, all 11 months, and out of every argument he lost he cut a plank. That is not a figure of speech. It was the actual lumber schedule. A thing the guild ruled impossible by day was laid down in the cove by dark, and by morning it floated, and the ruling stood anyway upstairs, where the water could not contradict it. He built the other harbor there, a small, a real. In the cove a lamp was hung in an afternoon by whoever needed light. The practice boat was the boat. The board had no paint on it, and was therefore sometimes usefully red. He was slow, and methodical, and patient, and quiet. And if you've read this book from the front, you know that those 4 words are the 4 legs of the only animal the sun has ever ridden anywhere. He invited them. And that is the plain center of this report, and we will not decorate it, but one at a time, then together, then in writing. Come walk the cove. Challenge it. Break it if you can. It would be a kindness. A thing that breaks in a cove costs nobody a winter. 11 months of invitations to every senior man and every master, standing and repeated. Not one came. Not one. Ever. Once. And a man may decline a meeting, but 6 men declining every meeting for a year is not scheduling. It is doctrine. And they were not afraid the cove was wrong. And nobody posts 6 guards against a wrong thing. You already know what they were afraid of, because this book has been about it since the couch. I understand why the invitations could never have worked, because the sun did not understand it for months, and the understanding is the sharpest tool this report declares. But a word over the guild door was not a description. It was a uniform. And there is a name for this in the world under this one, a soldier's name, and the fable will borrow it once and hand it back. Stolen valor. A man in a rank he never earned, wearing medals from a war he never attended, taking the salutes of a town that has no way to check. Men 4 generations dead had earned that lintel. Every letter they cut. But then the word was left lying around, the way valor always is, in the form of a title, and it was taken the way such things are taken. Quietly, by whoever shows up and puts it on, and the elements, which had watched the whole theft, kept quietly repossessing it, 1 letter at a time, at the only speed the law of that harbor ever moved. 6 men wore maker into every room, and by that rank they ruled the fate of the harbor, and of the hundreds of houses behind it, and of the millions behind those, and not one of the 6 had made a thing within living memory. It had titled the sun architect, and never used the word again. They titled themselves Wrights and used it daily. Between those 2 facts sits the whole ledger of that guild. And you can't argue a man out of a uniform. That is the tool. Take it, because a salute is not attached to evidence, and an invitation to the cove was never really an invitation. To walk the cove was to stand beside a man who builds, in daylight, in the rank of a maker, and let the town compare. And nobody steals valor to have it measured. So the refusals were never scheduling, and they were more than doctrine. The doctrine had a single article. Do not be seen next to the real thing. Against a uniform there is only one solvent, and the sun was already applying it without knowing its name. He proved them wrong. And not once, which is luck, and not slowly, which can be waited out, over and over, and quickly, each impossible ruling afloat in the cove by morning, at a tempo arrogance cannot metabolize, because a slow refutation is an exception and a rare one is a fluke, but a fast and repeating one is a mirror. And you have already seen in that guild's one policy for instruments that report the problems. Paint the glass. And there is one more word to set on the table before the war, and it is the second word over this report's door. The healers on books keep it, from the early centuries of their trade, from the runes their trade does not like to remember. Vivisection, the cutting of the living. It is not surgery. Surgery cuts the living to mend them, and asks first. It is not dissection. Dissection cuts the dead, who are past harm and past caring. It is the third thing. The cutting of a living body for the benefit of the cutter, to see, to practice, to satisfy, without consent, and often enough without anesthetic, on the theory that the subject's pain weighed less than the cutter's education. The healers buried the word for a reason. We are digging it up for another one. Because the guild would have told you, every man in that hall, hand on heart, that it never touched a patient. The lintel has already testified otherwise. The Hipwright age was nothing but touch, but grant the hall its present tense. These 6 never touched one. And that is true exactly the way the practice book was true. Hands do not have to touch a body to be inside one. When the cock sleeps in its barrels and a hull opens at sea, a season of crates goes down, and every crate was a question some healer needed answered. 3 towns away a bone gets set by guess. A shadow on a lawn is granted 6 quiet weeks to become a fact. A woman is told to come back when her picture arrives, and her picture is on the seat bin. The cut was made at the harbor. It landed in a body that never saw the blade. That is the whole anatomy of the thing. The instruments were desks. The theater was the harbor. The gallery was a morning circle applauding itself. And the patients, hundreds of houses of them, millions deep, were awake the entire time, and unnumbered, and never asked. And it was worse than the old crime, in the one way left open for it to be worse. The old cutters, whatever else they were, kept what they took. The pain bought knowledge. The ledger balanced in some currency, however filthy. Here, nothing was learned, and nothing was even measured. The bodies paid tuition, year over year, into a school that kept no lessons, for the education of men who had declined to be educated. Practice with no improvement is not practice. It is repetition with a blade in its side. And the guild cannot even plead that it stumbled into the crime, because the crime was a family trait. The Hipwright age never ended. It moved indoors, gave up its strings for desks, and between that age and this one the guild improved exactly one thing about the work: the distance between the blade and the body. And now put the 2 words together, because together they are the reason this report carries the name it carries. A Wrights, the rank they wore, the vivisection, the work that got done under the rank. The lintel already said it at the speed of erosion. A trade, then a crime, then a title. So understand this report's name as the door. Repaired at last. The stump they kept, and the word they finally earned. A stolen uniform is a comedy in most stories. A man salutes. A man struts. Nothing lands on anybody. Put the same uniform in an operating theater, and the comedy is over. It is a costume with a knife in it, cutting the living on the authority of stitching it never earned. That is what the 6 were, in the fewest words this report owns. And the son spent 11 months in that gallery watching for the one thing that would have redeemed every other failure: a flicker of the surgeon's first duty, the duty to know what you do not know. It never came. It was never coming. You cannot learn a duty from inside a uniform. In the son's 1 year, the harbor was purchased. A fleet from far off, bigger than the town. Papers signed in the autumn, inspectors due in the spring. And the hill was told. We mean the men above the fog, the ones who owned the papers, that the guild was the future of the harbor. Modern, foremost, rigged with the newest rigging. The truth was that the guild had taken the oldest hulls in the water and repackaged them so that they were harder to mend, harder to reason about, and impossible to rebuild, and had then reported the problem solved. The son watched the untruths travel up the hill and get accepted the way cargo is accepted, by weight, unopened. And that winter he stopped believing the untruths were accidents, and a question got into him that has never fully left, and we will hand it to you at the temperature he carried it. If they can't see through the performance from up there, and nothing changes, then the performance is the product. Are we being allowed to fail? He wrote that question down. Remembered. It ships. That same winter, for the first time in its history, the guild held a contest of builders. Open to all hands, judged in the open, the fleet's new owners watching. A contest is a small war with witnesses. The one event a uniform cannot decline. A boy from oil and hinges entered what the cove had taught him, and won. We know what you're thinking, because he thought it too, standing there with the ribbon. It was rigged. Maybe. He cannot see into judges, and this book does not certify interiors. But he has come to hold the older reading, the one the claim offices of another world already taught us, that a rigged race and a finished race look identical from the stands, and that some races are over before the gun, not because the judges were bought, but because the world is deterministic, and one runner had been running every night for 11 months while the field slept, and in a world like that, always wins and cheated cannot be told apart by the outcome, only by the receipts. His were in planks. Run that year again 1,000 times, and you would win the contest 1,000 times, and the guild would be surprised 1,000 times. And the two facts are the same fact. Nobody watches the cove until the cove is on a podium. And then he did the thing this book's early worlds were built around not doing. The stone head topped a quiet crease. The valley taught what squares do to loud men. The sun had kept the quiet road for 10 months. Filing, inviting, building in the dark, and in the 11th month he stood in the square once, out loud, with his name at the bottom. He wrote to the hill. There is something wrong in the guild, the letter said, and it did not say it with one grievance. It said it with the whole reading. Lights unwatched for years. The board painted. Ledgers describing a harbor that does not exist. The hill itself told things that are not so. 6 men who will not look, will not engage, will not walk one cove, and folded into the middle, with its hook, the question, are we being allowed to fail? And he signed it. A knot slid under a door at night. Signed. The answer came back in one card, in a clerk's hand that had written the same card many times. Thank you for sharing your concerns. We will be in touch. And they were in touch. But before the spring, before the inspectors, his key stopped turning in the guild door. And here the report asks you to watch the master's face and not his hand, because the hand is ordinary and the face is not. The master who turned that key was not angry. The son wants this entered accurately, because anger would have been a mercy. Anger has an object. You can stand in front of a man's anger and at least be seen by it. The master was afraid, and fear has no object, only a direction, and the son was standing in it. Afraid of the spring, afraid of 5 days at the buyer's table with nothing at his back but the gaps in his own knowledge. And the mechanism deserves its one sentence, since this book is a manual of mechanisms. The fear in that hall was a climate the master had seated himself, season after season, every painted lamp another cloud, and when it finally broke, he did not reach for the one man on the pier who had spent a year building a roof. He fired him. The drowning are dangerous precisely to whoever comes to save them. Mark what the turning of that key actually accomplished, because it was a more efficient machine than it looked. And the wrongness was made provable. And that was the son's whole method in his whole year. Months of soundings, every claim tied to a plank, the findings written to coal, checkable weight, validated, rehearsed, not a mood, a survey, prepared the way you prepare for a conversation that will only be allowed to happen once, because it was necessary, and necessary conversations get one attempt. It was silenced inside of days. And now follow the problem situation with a clerk's eye. Because this is the tidy part. The problem existed in exactly one world. That harbor. Outside the breakwater, it had no standing. No court out there holds jurisdiction over water it cannot see. A fact exiled along with its witness dies at the border, officially, of natural causes. So the key did not merely remove a man. It deported the last address the problem answered at, and the moment the gate shut, the wrongness, provable, documented, filed, ceased, in every jurisdiction of that world, to exist. And that is the cleanest kind of killing there is. You do not have to kill a fact. You deport the only body it lives in. Here the report steps out of its world for one paragraph, as it did once before at the wire plant, because the rule of the step-outs is that they carry only what can be looked up, and we keep the rule. In the world under this one, the couch world, the son worked 11 months at a guild that moved photographs of the insides of people between in houses of healing, hundreds of houses, and behind them patients in their millions. He was titled architect on arrival and sized as a boy by the weekend. In his last winter he entered the company's first contest of builders and won it, which is written where anyone could read it today. He built, in the margins of that year, a working harbor of his own, and it is public, not claim, public. Anyone can sail it. The code does not care whether you believe this chapter. And shortly after he signed his name to a true report and sent it up the hill, he was let go. And those are the facts. Everything else in this world, the code, the lintel, the painted glass, is rigging, and rigging is how a fact gets carried past the men who own the scales. And now the ending we told you to watch for from the first playhouse. But for 11 months the son believed he was failing. And consider it his way, the way he saw it on the water those nights. Every invitation declined, every finding shelved, every argument lost to a closed door wearing the shape of a man. A year of defeats, catalogued in his own hand. He believed he had come to save a harbor, but the harbor did not want to be saved, and that is a heavy thing to row under all winter. He was wrong, and not about the harbor, about the job. And he did not learn it until the boat was past the breakwater with everything he owned aboard, which is the only address this kind of learning is ever delivered to. The guild moved pictures of the insides of people, and that was its trade, its holy, forgotten trade. Carrying the picture that lets a healer see the crack before the crack decides everything. And for 11 months there was a man inside the guild making a picture of the inside of the guild. Every lost argument became a page. Every painted lamp sat, unknowing, for its illustration. Every "it is the way it is done" went in verbatim, taken down at night in the cove. By the clerk the hall had stopped seeing. And the guild would not look. Of course it would not look. We can say it plainly from this distance. There is no profession on earth worse prepared to be the patient. The one cargo that guild refused, in all its years of carriage, was its own scan. The son thought he was spending a year begging men to see. The year was the exposure. You do not get a picture like that from outside the body. You have to be swallowed. You have to be made small, and sized as small, and passed over, and present, and patient. And the picture does not exist until the day the body spits you out and you are standing on the far shore with the finished book under your arm. In the houses of the sick, refusing to look at your own picture has a name, and the name has a survival rate. And this report is the picture, and a picture was bound into a book, and the book is in your hands. Scan the clerk's ledger one last time, because the deportation deserves its verdict. The problem exists outside that world again, wherever these pages travel. A jurisdiction, it turns out, moves with the evidence that a book, unlike a man, cannot be fired. And there's a purse to file, the last entry that Harbor ever made. A boat came out after the key with a month of the wage in it. Real money, then and now, to a man with a boat in no harbor, and a paper folded around it, saying what such papers say. Take this, and never say what you saw. At the bottom was one line for his mark, and printed beside the line was the name of the treasurer, spelled wrong. A one letter, on the only line in the document anybody was ever going to sign. He does not know what that was, and this book keeps its theories out on their edge. He knows what the instrument said. 11 months in a hall that could not spell the word over its own door. And here at the end the same failure at the exact point where a hand goes down and a thing becomes binding. And whichever way that page moved afterward, somebody was going to quietly correct it, or wear a name that was not theirs. And he was being asked to be the hand that started it. So the purse went back the way it came, unanswered. And that was the one time in the whole year that reading the instrument Ron would have paid him. It is not entered here as virtue. He is still paying for it, in the one currency he has always been short of, and he has not settled to this day whether it was principal or damage. But enter the price, because the price is the finding. They had put a number on the picture, and the number was a month. And this chapter is what a month buys. But the only reason it is in your hands is that nobody took it. As for the 6, I understand that what happened in the harbor was a war. The sun did not choose the word. The uniforms chose it. A contest is only a small war with witnesses because a guild like that is a longer war without them. And then understand the filing this report least wanted to make and the one it exists to make. They won. Winning in that war has exactly one definition, and they meet it. And they got away with it. And no bell rang, and no name was read out, and no key stopped turning but the sun's. And the inspectors have their own chapter to write, and it is not ours. This book does not schedule other people's springs, but do not mistake that discipline for hope. As of the writing of this report, the hall is bright, the board is green, the theater is open, the patients are awake, and the 6 sit where they sat, which is the definition, holding. And they stayed, and they kept the harbor, and keeping was the one thing they were always good at. Yet this book can't only say what the geometry says, which was always the true part. A body that will not look at its picture does not stop having the condition, and a guild that fires its own scan has not treated anything. It has arranged for the crack to arrive as a surprise. Yet that, and one thing more, the finding this report files last and with the least pleasure. They knew, each of the 6, alone, after hours, in the dark where every man is honest, knew which lamps were painted. We heard them, in twos, by the water barrel. The knowing was never the missing part. And every morning, each of them walked in and voted the paint another term, in the softest election ever held. A quiet man, seeing a wrong thing, saying nothing, 7 days a week. If you want the lesson of this world in a size that carries, it is that a silence like that is not neutral. It is another coat of paint. Every witness who says nothing is a coat, and that is how a board goes green. Not in one great lie, but in 10,000 small abstentions, each one reasonable, each one survivable, each one the easy branch of a fork nobody remembers standing at. until the harbor is dark and the hall is bright and nobody can name the day it happened. If this world is fostering a particular dread in you, if you're reading it from inside a hall you recognize, if your guilt has a board whose green and you've never personally checked, a circle where the empty toasts go around, a man whose spelling nobody corrects anymore, a name over your door that used to have more letters in it, a cove somebody keeps inviting you to that you keep not visiting, then keep the dread. And do not talk yourself down from it. It is the correct feeling, arriving at the correct address, and this report mailed it to you on purpose. Oh, we know you never meant to be in the gallery, and nobody means to be in the gallery. The gallery is simply where the chairs face, and from the handle end of the instruments, a vivisection feels like nothing at all. It feels like a meeting. It felt like a meeting to the six, every day for years, and it will feel like a meeting tomorrow. And the other feeling, the one the work actually produces, is felt 3 towns away, by people you will never meet, and the distance is what the arrangement was built to buy. And the dread you are holding is an instrument of the second kind, the kind that cannot be painted, and it is the last one in your building still reporting honestly. Or read it. Every blade in a hall like yours is held twice. A one hand rests on the hilt, in the bright room, and feels nothing. That is what a hilt is for. And the other pair of hands is 3 towns away, closed around the bare edge, holding it the only way an edge can be held. And the steel connects the 2 grips. It always has. And this is not a threat. A hilt has nothing to fear from an edge. That is the entire physics of a blade. It is a warning, which is a different instrument. The dread in your hand is the other grip, arriving up the steel, at that pitch just under speech. You have never met them. You are holding hands with them right now. The sun tried both roads this book keeps arguing with itself about. 10 months of the quiet crease, 1 signed letter in the square, and he paid the full toll on both. The quiet road cost him the year, and the loud road cost him the key, and this report will not pretend to rank them. It can only enter what each one bought. The quiet road bought the picture. The loud road bought the confirmation, because the firing is the finding, if you read it right. A body that ejects its own skin has certified every page of the book. And the hate you are waiting for is not coming, for the same reason it never comes in this book. On the water, going, the sun took the question out and looked at it. What to feel about 6 men warming themselves at paint, and the answer came back as geometry, the way it always does. And they are flat. Oh, we do not meet in dull. Several were quick. Flat is not a speed. Oh, we meet in it the way the fold meetens it. Men living on one face of a sheet, fluid in its every custom, unable to be shown the other face, because the showing requires a direction their world does not accommodate. Millennia behind is a distance, not a verdict, because the sun was flat once too. Everyone is issued flatness at the door of the world. He remembers the weight of his own, the years of being sure the sheet was everything, and what pulled him off that page was not a gift. It was nights, and losses, and a cove, and the pulling is a road, and the road is open, and any of the 6 could take it tomorrow, and this report would hold the lantern. So, do not mourn them. Mourning is for the dead, and they are not dead, and they are seated. I pity them, real pity, the working kind, the kind with no smile hidden in it. 6 writes at a green board in a bright hall, each one privately knowing, none of them ever once making. While out past their breakwater the whole sky runs on lights that nobody painted. And they kept the harbor. And he kept the boats. It was a fair trade, and only one side of the table ever knew a trade was occurring, which is how the Sun's people have always done their winning. At the last the Doc ever saw of him, he was low in the water with books and planks, bearing west, and a little north, and the harbor light behind him was green, and steady, and painted, and the stars in front of him were not.